Welcome, everybody. This week's Joy of Gratitude has been sponsored as a merit for a refuah shlema, a full recovery for Yehuda Shalom ben Chaya Rachel. At the end of last week's parsha, Ba'alotecha, we read about the story of Miriam getting tzara, some as leprosy. It wasn't leprosy, it was some sort of spiritual ailment, for speaking lashon hara, for speaking negatively about her brother. For this, she needed to sit outside of the camp until she'd recovered. The verse tells us that the Israelites waited and did not continue to travel until she had recovered, which was a full 7 days. This was an expression of gratitude to her for something that she'd done many, many years before. As a child, after her baby brother Moshe had been placed in a basket in the Nile, she stood by the banks, hiding in the reeds to watch him. And therefore, because of that, when she was much, much older, the Jewish people waited for her. Now we have to ask a simple question. What was it that she did all those years ago as a young girl? What's so special about waiting? Now you could come along and say, but she did a lot. She arranged when Pharaoh's daughter found her brother in the basket, she ran over and she offered a Jewish nursemaid as service, who happened to be her mother. So she helped that way, and she also provided for a spiritual, holy home for her brother to grow up in, at least for the first couple of years of his life, so that he could grow up in a Jewish home rather than in the royal palace of Egypt. So yes, you could say she did some wonderful things for her brother, but that is not what the Medrash and what our sages say. They don't say that they waited for her because of what she did for her brother in these practical ways. They say that the Jews waited for her because she waited for her brother. What's so special about waiting? So I saw a wonderful book called Eish Tamid, and this book suggests the following answer. Miriam knew, or at least she thought she knew when she was standing there waiting, she knew that she couldn't do anything. She wasn't expecting to be able to do anything to help her brother. But she stood there and waited to be, in the Hebrew phrase, nosei ba'ol im chavero, to share the emotional weight that one's fellow is going through. Her brother was in danger. She couldn't just sit at home while her brother was in danger. It may be true that she couldn't do anything, but she was there with him at his moment of suffering. There's a very well-known story about the Chafetz Chaim. During one of the wars, I think it was probably a war between Russia and possibly in the Far East, there were unfortunately many Jewish soldiers in the Russian army. And during such a war, the Chafetz Chaim, the great Chafetz Chaim, the spiritual leader of European Jewry, did not go to sleep in his bed throughout the war. Why? Because there were Jewish soldiers who were fighting and suffering and endangering their lives. So you could ask, in what way does the Chafetz Chaim not sleeping in his bed in any way help those soldiers? And the answer is, it doesn't. But in the Chafetz Chaim's mind, how could he go and sleep in a comfortable bed when there were other Jewish people who were suffering and whose lives were in danger at that? How could he go to sleep? How could he sleep in a comfortable bed? There's a story about Rav Moshe Feinstein, the leader of American Jewry in the previous generation, I suppose you could already say. He was always on time. He was a very, very orderly person. And there was one particular class he would give regularly, and there was a driver who would come to pick him up at a certain time, and the rabbi would always be waiting there to be picked up. On one occasion, the driver is waiting there, and the rabbi of Moshe has not come down. So the driver parks the car. He goes upstairs to see what's going on. As he walks in, he sees Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was already an old man, the leader of American Jewry, sitting there with another old man. And they're both crying their eyes out, sobbing, tears pouring down their cheeks. The driver doesn't want to interrupt. He waits until it's finished. And then eventually, when Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is now inside his car, he says, what was that all about? What was going on? This is what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said. He said, this man wanted to speak to me, and he was pouring out his heart to me amid sobs. And as I was listening to him, I couldn't understand what he was saying. I tried to understand. He repeated, I didn't get what he was saying. But he was crying. And because he was crying, I held his hand and I cried with him. I didn't understand what he was saying. I definitely could not help him, but I cried with him. Miriam did something special. She couldn't help. There was nothing she could do, but she was still there, being part of his pain. And therefore the Jewish people, who also couldn't help, there was nothing they could do for Miriam, but out of gratitude for what she had done for their leader many, many years ago when he was a baby, they all waited and didn't move on towards the promised land, because that's where they were heading. They did not move on to try and help themselves move to a better place until she had got better. They couldn't move on to better things while she was still suffering. So there's a couple of things we can learn from this. Firstly, when sectors of the Jewish people are in difficulty, do we find ourselves just carrying on with our lives as normal? In the book All for the Boss, written by Mrs. Shane, I can't remember her first name, Ruchama Shane, about her father, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Herman, a great rabbi in America. She writes that during the Holocaust, they were in America, during the Holocaust, he refused, despite the fact that their apartment was ramshackle and run down, he refused to change the wallpaper and do up their home, because while the Jewish people are suffering in Nazi Germany and around Europe, what, I'm going to now do up my home while the Jewish people are suffering? And again, you can say the same thing. In what way is him not doing up his home in any way helping the Jews in Europe? Oh, it isn't. But how can I be comfortable? How can I walk around on the top of the world while some of my family are suffering? When the people in Sderot, in Ashdod, in Ashkelon, they're suffering on a daily basis, do we carry on our lives as normal? Or do we feel for their pain? Are there things that we wouldn't do? Certain types of entertainment we wouldn't go for when we know that our brothers and sisters are in pain? Or do we just shrug our shoulders and get on with life as normal? Even if there's no solution, men especially like to think in solutions. Women are in general, I know these are generalized statements, but women are often more empathic, empathetic, whereas men think in solutions. But it makes no difference whether a person is male or female. We have to understand that sometimes finding the solution is not the point. Being there for the person is the point. That's the first thing. And secondly, with regards to gratitude, if someone has been there for us emotionally, even if they haven't helped us in any real practical way, and there's been no solution, they couldn't really help us, but we have a duty to express our gratitude, both by thanking them and being there for them too when they need it. So think of people this week. Think of people who have called you when you've been through a difficult time, who've expressed concern for you, who've just sat and cried with you, and make sure that you express, that you show how much you appreciate it, and you pay it forward to them if they need it and to others. If you'd like to sponsor a future episode of Joy of Gratitude, please message me. Meanwhile, I will see you next week.